Antonia Brickell. How are you today?
Good, thank you, Eric. Apart
Good
from it's
stuff.
grey and rainy
Yeah, exactly. We
today.
don't we don't want that. We don't want that at all. It's dismal. Have you still got? Did you have any trace of snow where you are?
Oh, absolutely. There was. I may be talking about my age here, but it was Torval and Dean, really. Just walking outside the front door with
It
the
was
dog.
Torval indeed.
Oh, but you know when you don't even try to, and it's wet. So yes, pretty to look at, but it's all gone now.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
not
We're
very
the
good,
same.
practical.
No, not
Mm.
at all. We're the same. So it's completely gone. We're back to sort of damp greenery here in Aberdeen. But I did realise just before we hit record on this that this is probably the most dangerous Crux Cast we've ever done, because I think you and I could do an hour on hello. we could just
We
get
could.
stuck on how you're doing. So we're going to have some rules of engagement here, right, and just keep ourselves bubbling along, or we'll just get stuck in a groove.
Like a red card. I've got a red makeup bag, so I could kind of, if it gets too far, I haven't got anything yellow to do the kind of football analogy, but
We'll
sort
we'll
of
we'll,
wave.
mar- we'll march on all the same. So
Okay.
in true to form, let's start off with for people who don't know what you're all about and what you do for a living. What's Antonia Brickell Freelance all about?
Okay, so I simplify the complex is my mission. So mainly at the moment working with biotech, tech, health-related companies who have an amazing product. And obviously in such a fast-moving digital world, there's a lot of people who are, for COVID reasons or digital reasons, creating these incredible products. But the thing is, so many people really understand what they do. And understandably, if you're an expert, you can veer off into technical jargon and with acronyms and WXYV, and everyone's listening going, that sounds great. I've got no idea what you're doing. So my background, a lot of my background has been about translating medic speak, senior clinicians, life-saving clinicians, and trying to put things into a normal language. So I'm working with companies to create podcasts, to help promote what they do in a soft selling approach, where you give people a chance to listen to a conversation that hopefully is interesting and not too dry, and they come away and think, oh, okay, now I get it. So that's mainly what I do. And then voiceovers, narration, media training. So yeah, that's what I do.
Fantastic. Now that's certainly what you do for a living, but there's so much more to you. And if it's okay, if you could just humour me for a little minute, can we go back in time to where it all started, where you grew up and school life and all of that? Could you take us back to where it all started to fit into place?
Well, I'm a London girl.
Yep.
By I was about to say by trade. That sounds dodgy. Don't know what that means.
By trade.
So, by trade.
Yeah.
And my mum describes herself as a very gentle Sloane Ranger. So the clue is there. I grew up off King's Road.
Wow.
In Sloane Square. Literally, the Sloane Square tube. You'd look out of my bedroom window, and there would be a gap that I could see where the tube would go under the house. So I would get used to the distant rumble of tubes. Very glamorous. It's not quite what you imagine King's Road to be like, but it's a great place to spend my very early childhood anyway.
My goodness, I can only imagine. I mean, you must have observed out of that bedroom. I mean, when did you leave there? What age did you leave that house?
So I remember bombing to school with a beret, which sounds in the back of Mum's Mini. She had the proper Twiggy minis, and it was just so much easier around in the 70s. We're talking about to bomb around the city in a Mini. It was very practical. But there's so much of my childhood that I remember in patches. But we moved to Cambridgeshire just in time for me to go to boarding school in Suffolk. So I was about 10, 11. And then throughout my life, I've gone back and lived in various parts of London. So Yeah, I miss it, but London is such, I mean, it's a huge village, isn't it? There's so much to it.
Yeah, cool. No, I can only imagine what you must have seen out of those out of that bedroom window. Some of the amazing scenes that you must have seen around about that time. It must have been fantastic. But you went off to boarding school, and how did that all work out? Was that an amazing experience? Were you the studious type, or how did it work out?
Well, I've got much younger brothers and sisters, and so I grew up with half brother and sister who really, my stepdad, I call dad, was really mainly looking after us all alongside my mum. And all three of us went to boarding school. I don't have children. I always wanted to have children. Well,
Right.
I say I don't have children, but I'm engaged to Andy, who has 4 children. So it's a joy.
Yeah.
They're much older. But I think if I were to choose to send my children to boarding school, I probably wouldn't.
Right.
For some people, they say it's the most amazing time in their life. For me, I was quite homesick.
Right.
To begin with. The first photo I think we've got of me at boarding school was just so embarrassing. My hair looked like the Jackson 5 in the junior days, but not in a fashionable way.
Right.
Kind of, yeah. And I was knitting really, practically gurning. Beautiful child.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. And I remember just thinking, oh, I don't know if this is for me. So I think, well, I know I combated the homesickness by just being, can I say this, an absolute little bugger. I was so rebellious, and I was the clown. So we used to organise freaky fashion shows. So that was my idea when we used to come back home from half term, and everyone would feel a bit, dormitories of 12, 14 people, bed, chest of drawers, bedside cabinet, that's it. That's your world at the age of 11. And there'd always be the heart sinking feeling. So I said, right, okay, to make it feel better for all of us, we need to find the most ridiculous outfits we possibly can. And as soon as lights were out, we would use the walkway between the beds, the main through the dorm, as the catwalk. Right. So, and we used to have so much fun unless we were caught, and the matrons would just go nuts because they would flick the lights on. But I remember being caught with tooth blackener, and I was wearing some of my mum's old curtains, and I had, for some weird reason, I don't know why, a pillowcase around my ankles. So I was stuck, sort of freeze frame, as the head matron, who I'm sure she really did have a boggly eye when she was angry. But anyway, no offense to people but it was just, when she got really angry, her eyes would flicker, and I would be stuck in the middle of the dorm with tooth blackener on, not being able to move. So I was banished to the sand for a week for that.
Banished to the sand?
No, the sanatorium, nylon sheets, so the sick bay.
Oh my.
Oh, Eric, oh my word. Nylon sheets, because obviously if you're poorly, easier to wash, and you pop them back on there. As an adult, being practical, beautiful, but awful. Yeah. That with the old 70s, 90s that used to kind of light up when you rub the fabric together.
Nice. Nice. Lovely.
So yes. So then I was just, you name it. I used to have fire extinguisher fights. Used to final day, got all year to jump in the swimming pool. That was great. The teachers loved that. Just constantly Sunday lunch, supposed to wear Laura Ashley dresses, and always have to be looking immaculate. And I decided that 4 of us would go out on a exploration in the woods, and so we disappeared for 5 hours. So things like that. I was a joy, I think, probably looking back. Yeah,
an absolute joy. So a bit of a rebellious streak coming out there. So you leave school smeared in tooth blackener and awash with fire extinguisher foam, and off you trot to university. I'm particularly intrigued by what drove you towards what you did at university, because I find the subjects fascinating. Tell us what you did and why.
Well, I studied psychology and artificial intelligence, which of course now AI is, everybody knows what AI is, but at the time it was just another world. I mean, I'm that old that I think at that time they had modelled a blackbird's brain successfully. So that shows how far we've come in those times. And also, it was a really weird mix of subjects. So with that was philosophy. So I remember sitting for 4 hours in a seminar discussing if an amoeba has emotions. And you know, when you start to think, and I'm out there, I like, you know, I'm all for just living the dream. And you know, amoebas clearly have feelings too, or not. But 4 hours,
Yeah.
I really wanted to go into criminology, which sounds now looking back a bit odd. And my poor parents, after having put up with those, you know, fire extinguisher bills and goodness knows what, then I sort of went home, and at Sunday lunch I was like, guess what? My dissertation. I've got my first choice. And they were like, oh, that's fantastic. What have you gone for? And at the time, the Home Office were, they were trialling a pilot to work with Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science students to be, where you would pitch a list of dissertations. And my top favourite, double thumbs, was interviewing serial killers and serial sex offenders at Wakefield and Wandsworth Prison.
Right.
So my mum was just like, oh, that's great. Oh. And I took up kickboxing beforehand.
Good choice.
Just because I wanted to get into a sport, and somebody said, well, actually kickboxing is so good for confidence and for feeling confident physically, not to be violent, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But in that kind of environment, to be walking into the main wings, you know, at Wakefield, you want to feel confident, because any what's the word I'm looking for? Any obvious vulnerability visually would not have been good for the project that I was doing.
So was this, I mean, I'm hoping that you're not going to correct me here, but I'm guessing this was all highly regulated, high security, you know, like there was people, arms were chained, legs were chained. It was like Hannibal Lecter. People were wheeled in, strapped to boards, and you were chatting to them surrounded by armed guards, right?
Oh my word, no, it was totally different. And I actually also, it's almost so worrying, it's funny if I look back. So we were given so it was a couple of us were chosen, and the other lady, Mandy, she's just petite, tiny, little voice like this, very doll-like, really beautiful. And there's me with this kind of booming voice and double her height and broad, and so that was interesting, a psychological experiment in its own right. But we were both allocated converted cells. I say converted, they just had a table and with a very tiny window, clearly with bars, and a couple of ornaments that were sometimes made by inmates. Excuse me. Bizarre, this dog ornament made out of green Rizzler packets, which sounds slightly odd, but that was the homely ornament that was sat on the top of the windowsill. And then there was a bell under the table, so that if things got a little bit tricky with the chosen inmate, because it was one-to-one, semi-structured interviews about whether they were emotionally isolated and not, you know, almost loners, had never really established what friendship was. And also they hadn't experienced emotional life and love, you know. So it was quite, looking back, the questions were really personal. And I was always late. So quite often the bell was often on the inmate side of the table. So I'd get there and think, oh, God, it's on their side again. But I just thought, act casually, no one will know.
I mean, it's bad enough that the security measure was, if anything goes wrong, revert to campanology.
Exactly.
Ding dong.
Exactly. But just literally, the guy. Well, it was one of those. The doorbells, the old-fashioned doorbells, the white plastic.
Yeah.
That lots of us still have. That's what it was.
Right.
So
Okay. Thank you. So it wasn't a
No, I just wanted to get that straight. Yes, London's burning. London's burning. No, it wasn't quite like. Yes. Help!
So you went from. I mean, the amoeba thing is funny enough, but let's just circle back on what you said there. The amoeba thing just reminds me of, there's a brilliant Frankie Boyle joke, "Love Him or Loathe Him," where he says that he's always beguiled by science and science investments and what we invest in science. And he does this little one-to-one skit with himself, and he says, two scientists are talking, and he says, "Frank, do you fancy having a go at trying to cure cancer today?" And he went, "No, Billy, I'm too busy trying to work out how many wine gums it takes to choke a kestrel."
Yes, the amount of money that goes into, how long does it take before your cornflakes go soggy? Or
yeah, exactly.
It's
absolutely
mad. Yeah.
So you finished up at uni, did all the scary stuff in prisons and all of that, and I guess you learnt a hell of a lot, right, to take back in. That dissertation was fairly valuable, right, in just life lessons.
Yeah, totally. I think I felt if I could do that, I could do anything, because you would read the inmates' files before going in, and clearly that did not make the most comforting of reading. It was also a bit of a shocker, really, because I've worked in the media, commercial and BBC for the majority of my professional life, so I have sat in the newsroom and for a long time, and whilst those have come in and out. But I think until you're in that situation, you kind of think that someone who does or is capable of something like that, which we won't even begin to go into, is there's some kind of visual sign. They've got something kooky about them, not in a nice way. Yeah. And certainly the front page of the tabloids, lead you to believe that, oh gosh, look, this is the face of someone who would do this animal. And actually, I would say about 3/4 of the people I talked to were fairly attractive, smart, funny. Quite often they were very young and grew up in a very abusive household, and so that was their normality, and it was quite scary that you can't just go, look, that person walking down the street. And also just how interesting the whole setup in the prisons were. Right. How it was set up, how this kind of hierarchy. I felt less intimidated by the inmates than I did the structure of the prison. Really? It's odd. Yeah, it was really odd. And something else that I remembered yesterday, when we were at Wakefield, they were filming for an episode in the sex offenders wing, which is where I was. And they were filming for an episode of something like The Bill, so there were actors who were dressed up as prison officers and genuine prison officers. So bells were going off left, right, and centre. And without going into details, one of the inmates had a bit of a collision, shall we say, with another inmate. All the bells were going off, and I was sat in this converted cell thinking, what is going on with an inmate trying to make quite interesting discussion? So nice weather, isn't it? I'm feeling so hot with this tiny
reaching under the table for the bell.
The bell.
The bell.
Just thinking, what is going on? Yeah. And I just look back and think, I cannot believe two inmates could have a fight. And because no one knew who were the actors, you look back and you think it's stuff that books are made of, really. Yeah,
totally. So the natural thing from all of that, studying the emotions of amoebas, studying high-risk prisoners and people that are high risk to society, or maybe were at some point in their life, the natural thing you do is to move into a world of broadcasting.
That's right.
That's
yeah.
yeah.
Oh no. Yes. I've just always been fascinated by what makes people tick. That's why I chose psychology, and I know it's that kind of, analogy. But the AI side, I found that was sciencey enough to make it challenging. And I was always fascinated by what makes us become the people that we are. And we all have a journey, don't we? So I decided that criminology wasn't really for me after that.
Okay.
I have absolute respect for people that work in that environment and choose to go into criminology. It's fascinating. But for me, I think I would have had to have become very, very, it's one thing to be strong, but it's another to be tough, tough inside and out. And I'm too soft. I think I would have been affected too much, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, when I was a kid, I did my own soap opera on a Casio, I think it's Casio cassette player, where you used to press the play and record.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in my grandparents' garden in the summer, in the holidays, and entertaining myself with my own radio show where I'd put on accents and badly sing the theme tune, which was quite repetitive. It was sort of lots of finger clicking. So it was sort of down Blogg's corner shop. Yeah, down Blogg's corner shop. And that was the theme tune. It was centered around Blogg's corner shop, funnily enough.
Right.
Fascinating.
You played all the characters.
Played all the characters.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it wasn't a hit. It wasn't picked up by the Beeb.
The mind boggles.
Yeah.
So I've always loved, my poor brother and sister, we used to not make them do plays because that sounds bad, but we would have productions, with illustrated programs, and poor things, with their props as kids, with the older sister going, come along, with a clipboard practically, which they never let me forget. So yeah.
So actually the idea of broadcast journalism and talking to an audience that may or may not you may or may not be able to see actually wasn't that alien to you, because you were kind of almost practicing for that as a child, right?
Yeah, maybe. I think that's pretty intuitive, and the family dynamics were quite complicated in our life. I sort of grew up with 3 sets of parents, and I think as kids you grow up very, very quickly, and boarding school in some respects helped me to grow up very quickly in a sort of psychological independence sort of way,
I'm sorry for that. I'm just imagining it must have been how many times was, Antonia, would it be a good idea if you went down to the bottom of the garden and did all your talking to yourself for maybe a couple of hours?
What a great idea. Off you go.
Bye. Go and do your soap opera.
Yes.
That'll be great. We can hear it from here. It's brilliant.
Yes.
Keep going.
Surrounded.
Keep going.
Yes. Right to the end.
Right
Perfect.
to the end. Yeah. Get on the bus. Get on the bus. So huge forward, because for anyone who checks your profile, I don't come across many people in my daily life who've got 17 years at the BBC on their profile. Now, that might be the bit that you don't want to talk about, but I'm sure loads of people would love to hear what's it like to work with the BBC. Now, you were a broadcaster, voiceover artist, and you had a lot of things going on. Broadcast journalist, drive time presenter, my goodness, breakfast and lunchtime presenter for the Beeb, lifestyle news and report. I mean, you did a lot there in 17 years, right? Lots and lots. What's it like to work for the Beeb?
I loved it. And I loved it when it was, commercial radio, I just behaved like a kid, and it was good fun.
Yeah.
And we used to get up at ridiculous hours to do the breakfast show, and it was just silly stuff, to get people smiling in the morning. But working for the BBC was just, it varied. I think each area has its own personality.
Right.
Around the country, I sort of deep voice bird, so they put me on late nights at BBC London, and and overnights was how I first started, and that was just bizarre because most of the listeners were American for obvious reasons because of the time. That was odd, being in the soundproofed room overnight with not many other people around and just creating a radio show. But it was an amazing experience because you're always learning, and I don't think you ever stop learning, but the different style and personality of the listeners make each show. I without a doubt, I would say, if you're lucky enough to have a producer and that producer is really good, then really good reporters, and you have that rapport, and the listener is part of it, because actually the reason why I got into radio was for the person listening.
Right.
I didn't do it because it was like, oh, I'm in radio. It's not, because actually at the end of the day, you just you're doing a job.
Yeah.
And I thought the biggest compliment was when someone would listen regularly and interact regularly and behave as if they know you, and they can really share their opinions with you as if they know you. Stories about, sometimes really personal stories about things that have happened in their lives. And for me, that was the buzz for me, that someone had put their trust in me, that they would share something on air with listeners that they couldn't see, obviously, because that's radio. And I've always preferred radio in certain respects, because you enable that person at the other end to create the picture. There's a place for television, there's a place for videos, there's a place for everything, of course there is, but there's something about telling a story and then you're creating the canvas for that person to make it their own. And I love that.
Awesome.
I love that,
really good. Fabulous.
So it was just, met some incredible people. One of the most frustrating times was, don't ask me how, but I managed to get the exclusive. It sounds like I'm name dropping, but I don't mean it like
every one of us want you to name drop. That's what we want to hear. Fire them in.
Okay. So Paul McCartney.
I was talking to Paul one day.
Paul
McCartney and I, or P-Dog as I call him.
I was so excited and absolutely terrified, because in a weird state of affairs, and I ended up getting, alongside CNN, the exclusive for him being a dad at 60. When he was previously married. And this was when I was in Yorkshire, and he was doing a big gig in South Yorkshire, and it just so happened that he was there. And literally, you got a PR person with the phone sort of saying, I can't do it, but you have 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes, you've 4 minutes, you've got 4 minutes left to talk to him, you've got 3 minutes, and you're trying to build some kind of rapport with this person you're terrified of interviewing. But the frustrating bit was that Sir Paul had clearly been eating pistachio nuts, because he, when you get that, and he was still eating, I don't know if it was a peanuts or pistachio, but he obviously still had, with the greatest respect, some kind of
nutty residue
action. Yes, exactly. Left.
Some pistachio paste action going on there.
And so the most of the interview, I was thinking, people were literally outside to
take a drink of water.
Well, and he didn't. He just thought, sorry, I've just been eating pistachios. And the whole time it'd be, and all I could hear was that. Of course, I pushed it. I was supposed to ask one question about him being a dad at 60, and I asked two.
Ooh.
Don't mess with the rules when you're talking to somebody like that.
Absolutely.
Run away. So some people unbelievably quiet and reserved and just so unaffected, who you expect to be totally the other way. And
I have like three if I was really, if someone said, have you ever met any famous people? I've met 3 famous people in my life, right? And one of them I was really, people always say, be careful what you wish for, and meeting your idols and all
Yeah.
that. I'm a huge Simple Minds fan, right? The Scottish band
Oh,
Simple
me
Minds.
too.
So I was going to do a running event, and I wrote to the record company and said, I'm going to see the band tonight, and the following day I'm leaving to go to Morocco to do a big running event, and I'm using Simple Minds as my playlist while I'm there. Is there any chance Jim could give us a shout out at the gig tonight in Aberdeen? So they wrote back and said, actually, he wants to meet you. So I remember just exactly what you said about, I didn't know I was going to meet this big, boisterous performer that's shouting, just a little meek, mild man, just really quiet. He came into the dressing room with a scarf on and some honey and lemon for his throat, which you'll love, right? You'll love that.
Yeah, very good for the voice.
The rest of the band were all in Jack Daniels and beer and all of that. He came in with some hot water, honey and lemon, and a scarf around his neck to protect his vocal cords. And he chatted away very quietly about Glasgow and blah, blah, blah. And we took a photograph and he left. And I thought, wow, because I had no idea how that was going to go, if this rock star was going to smash into the room and be a rock star, or if he was actually going to be the person that he is when he's not on stage, the other person. So that was really cool. But
that's a huge compliment to you as well, that he didn't put on the performer side, because there is very much that element, isn't it, with these massive bands, that feeling that when they're on stage, that's the demeanor. But how lovely that you met the real person as well.
He was more interested in the fact that my mother came from the same part of Glasgow, and reminiscing about that. He's very passionate about Glasgow, and he was more interested in how the mechanics of, how do you do 6 days doing marathons across the desert? How do you do that? He said, Charlie and I walked out, and we walked for 2 hours in Jordan, across the sands in Jordan, and we both nearly died. So how's that gonna work? With his wee Glasgow accent. So just a lovely, lovely person. But you're right. So, and I thought I'd slot in there the fact that he was looking after his vocal cords, Antonia. I thought you'd like that.
Very, very important. Seriously, it's like any other muscle. You have to look after your voice. You have to. It's very important.
And you've been helping us. You've been putting up stuff on LinkedIn about how we can, we're all talking these days on Zoom and stuff like that, and we need to protect our vocal cords.
Yeah, you're right, because you get exhausted, especially that it's so intense, isn't it? The new way of life, and it can be quite liberating in a lot of ways, but it's exhausting and overstimulating, isn't it? Or it can be sometimes if we're not careful. And I just think it's important to look after what we've got, I reckon.
This new way of life that you just mentioned there, clearly we're in the midst of this. Clearly it hasn't played out yet what lockdown has done, what pandemic has done to the world, what lasting change or short-term change. What concerns you about what's happened recently and what might happen in the future? What sort of catches your attention, or maybe keeps you awake at night thinking about how things might have changed?
What struck with talking to a real mixture of friends all over the country and all around the world is that we're unified in that sense of, we don't know what's next. It's really difficult to plan. That's the one thing that our existence at the moment leaves us with, I think, talking to people. We're so used to saying, well, we'll work really hard, or we'll do such and such, and then we'll do this. Yeah. And at the moment, that no man's land is, oh, well, fingers crossed, everybody. Oh, no, you mustn't do it twice, must you? Sorry. Fingers crossed, everybody, and everybody feels sort of disorientation. And the other thing is that people who normally, I would say, who feel really confident in themselves, so suddenly experience what it's like to feel, not to feel anxious, but I've sensed that more and more people have suddenly said, okay, I get what it means to feel anxiety, because it's one thing it happens so quickly. Now we're adjusted, but working at home and choosing to work at home is one thing, but being thrust into what we found ourselves doing is very different. And that whole, we've got to be working. I would hope that we have become, I can't even say it. I would hope that we've become kinder. She says optimistically.
Well, you're trying to force it with the T-shirt.
Yes, I am.
Be kind, be kind,
Kindness,
be kind.
It's our secret weapon. And when I say weapon, I don't mean that violently, but if you're kind to yourself, then you're going to be kind to other people. And hopefully there is more empathy. But then at the same time, I do worry about what we're going to do when we are allowed out again. You know, whether we're going to be rubbing our eyes and thinking, oh, you know, blinking in the headlights. That was a really quite frightening expression I pulled there. That's why I'm good for radio. I'm far too expressive. Yeah, I do worry about that acclimatization back to normality. What stands out to you?
Yeah, my worry is that we don't know what this has done to us yet. I don't know. I don't know what this has done. I know that we are in dealing with it mode. So I take my hat off to people that are just trying to march on and just trying to get things done and trying to do things and keep things going. And a very small example of that was just a few weeks. In fact, it was for Valentine's Day. We ordered a box of food from a nice restaurant, and they had sent a video with it, a Spotify playlist that they had made up, all the cooking instructions. They sent personalized notes. And basically this was an evening of entertainment in a box, but they'd gone that extra mile of, you know, log on to here, use this QR code, and we'll take you into the kitchen and we'll show you opening the packets and we'll make it with you. And we'll do it together. And here's a Spotify playlist to put on, and have opened this bottle at this point and have this cocktail at this point. And I thought, now look at that. That's a whole, those restaurateurs, those people that are doing this would never have thought of this in 19. Would never have thought of doing this. No. Now that's a very small example of how the world and people are really trying to make things happen. My worry is that we don't know what the negative effects are, or the knock-on effects are for 5-10 years down the line, economies and how business works. And I think we'll all be okay as people. I think as people, we're survivors. I do worry about kids at this point.
Tough, really tough.
Yeah, I've got a 16-year-old next door waiting to put the internet back on, because if he puts the internet on, we can't do this. And he's sitting trying to do higher physics on a computer with no teacher. Well, yeah, there is a teacher, but it's all a bit weird. Yeah, so I worry about the kids.
Yeah, me too. I mean, in this household, Molly, who's 19, she had the predicted grades for her A-levels, and didn't do the exams in the end, and that was all very, very odd. And she's gone straight into work. In fact, during lockdown, she applied to work as a carer, and she works as a full-time carer, and she's incredible. And I don't think even she realised how she would take to it. Yeah, she is incredibly kind by nature, but you're so right. I do worry about the economy. I hope that, as you say, we will get through it. We've got through worse in other years, many years gone. But the trouble is, there's nothing to compare it to, is there? That's right. That's right. There's no baseline, no reference point. People say, well, we've had other sort of like economic downturns before in the past, and yeah, but this is different. This is a complete reset. So exactly. But I do think normally we ask our guests to focus in on what might be a positive coming out of this. And your T-shirt and what you mentioned earlier on is I think I see people being more kind. I see it. Yeah, because because I suppose no matter where you come from, whatever you do, whatever stage of life you're at, we have all shared the same thing. Yeah. And suddenly there's this, whatever people's perceptions are of others, would hope, age, background, that actually we're all in it together. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but I think we've got to be. If it means checking in on the neighbours when you're on the way to the supermarket, because the neighbours can't leave because they're elderly, or we've got to do that, because one day it's going to be us, and we've got to hand that down to the younger generation so they grow up being empathetic. That's so key. That's so key, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? Do you know what? I never thought about that until you said it, that it's given us a common language, a common anchor point. You're so right. I'll be talking to people in India, talking to people in Singapore, Germany, blah, blah, blah. Our starting reference point is, how's life with you with COVID and lockdown and all of that? How's it affecting your country? We all have that thing that we couldn't speak about before because, yes, there might have been oil and gas or tech downturns or some horrible thing happens in some country, but this has been everyone everywhere completely. Yeah, I never thought about that. That's right. We all have this common anchor point, so it might be a common starting point for repair.
Yeah, I hope so. And also we suddenly realise what we're capable of.
Yeah.
You know, we're so used to so many things being excuse me, I'm about to choke. It's attractive. Sorry.
Nice.
Oh my God, it's because I was rude about Paul McCartney.
It's the pistachio's revenge. Pistachio's revenge.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my God, dragged under the table by a phantom nut.
As long as there's a bell to ring, you'll be fine.
No problem, sorted. But I suppose on the upside is we realise that we can hopefully, touch wood, be happy with far less. Not in a hippified way, but actually we are versatile and we are flexible, and also this is the time to experiment and make the most of what we've got, because time is short, isn't it? And I think this puts things in perspective, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I love it when the title for this little podcast comes out in conversation. Be happy with less. If you're okay with permission, I'd like to use that as the title for this because I think that's beautiful. Be happy with less. I think that's a nice set of bookends to put round that. Hey, listen, it's been nice to catch up. It's been so nice. A lot of what we do on this little 30-40 minutes with someone is to try and get behind the LinkedIn profile a little bit, get behind the CV, and show people a little bit of personality and a little bit of the life story. And your life story, I find it fascinating. And you know what? The sad thing is, we're probably going to have to revisit this because we didn't even scratch the surface, really, did we? Let's face it.
Well, it's the same, but I want to hear about you as well. Oh. Gosh.
Sorry, you're breaking up. Yes, up. Exactly. Time to move on.
Yes, exactly.
That's not how this works.
But thank you. I really appreciate you even remotely inviting me to be part of it, because it's a huge compliment, really a huge compliment. So thank you.
No, it's been a joy, an absolute joy, and we'll put links to your profile and all that so people can get in touch. And I'm sure, given your personality and given what you do for a living and just how you are as a human, you won't be adverse to anyone getting in touch with you for a bit of a natter about whatever it might be.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm so up for that. And whilst we talk about this, I need to sort my LinkedIn profile out. It's just too CV-like, and it just, when you look at people's profiles, you want to know who you're working with, don't you? Not a robot.
Yeah, very much so.
God, it's difficult. Anyway,
I'm trying to avoid. I spend all my life talking about social selling and strategic social media, so I try to avoid it as much as I can on the Crux Cast. But yeah, you need to sort your profile out. We'll talk about that later. Or I'm sure you're connected to some really cool people like Adam Gray and stuff like that. That we can help. We can help.
Well, 3 of you.
Yeah. We'll just do it en masse.
4 of you. There's an army of you. You're amazing.
An army.
No, seriously, there's a community.
A battalion.
Who says it like it is. Knights in shining social selling armor. But not selling. That's the beauty of it.
There's a blog in that. Knights in social selling armor. If Tim Hughes or Adam Gray are listening to this, just I hope they're smiling. No, fantastic. Listen, it's been brilliant. I can't wait to put this one out. It's been an absolute joy. Let's make a note to check in at some point in the future and see how you're getting on. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
We shall see you soon.
Thank you so much. God, I'm pulling so many weird faces. I'm just going to look like, people will be like, no wonder she was on bloody radio. Oh,